Ukraine's resistance to Russia's full-scale invasion remains at the center of a rapidly evolving battlefield, as Ukrainian military officials, intelligence-linked units, and frontline formations report a series of operations that they say have disrupted Moscow's winter campaign and imposed heavy losses on Russian forces across several sectors. According to the account emerging from Ukrainian military sources, Russia's 2025 to 2026 winter offensive, intended to generate momentum in the east, north, and south at the same time, has run into mounting operational problems, from stalled assaults and damaged logistics to the reported redeployment of elite units away from key sectors. The developments are being described in Kyiv as evidence that the Kremlin's latest push has failed to achieve its central objectives and, in some areas, has left Russian formations more vulnerable than before. At the heart of this narrative is the Southern Front, where Ukrainian units say Russian attempts to make progress in the Zaporizhzhia direction have been halted after months of fighting. Ukrainian military intelligence-linked formations stated on March 7th that the Russian offensive effort in that sector, which had continued through the winter, had effectively been stopped. Among the units cited in Ukrainian statements was the Timur Special Forces Group under the Main Directorate of Intelligence, or HUR, which said Russian troops suffered significant manpower losses on a single defensive line, and that dozens of Russian servicemen had been captured. Ukrainian officials are presenting those claims not simply as a local battlefield success, but as a sign that one of Moscow's major winter offensives in the south has failed to break through. The strategic importance of Zaporizhzhia has long made the area one of the war's most sensitive fronts. Before the war, the regional center was home to hundreds of thousands of civilians, and sat within reach of critical infrastructure, including Europe's largest nuclear power plant. For Kyiv, preventing any Russian advance toward the city has been about more than holding ground. Ukrainian officials have repeatedly argued that control over the broader region has implications not only for military positioning, but also for diplomacy, energy security, and pressure at any future negotiating table. In that context, the reported halting of Russian offensive action in the sector is being described by Ukrainian sources as the collapse of a broader attempt to turn battlefield gains into strategic leverage. Ukrainian accounts of what happened in the south focus heavily on logistics. According to those reports, intelligence and special operations units tracked Russian supply routes over an extended period, identifying ammunition depots, fuel convoys, and transport lines before they could fully support frontline assaults. In the version presented by Kyiv, the campaign against those logistical arteries, combined with persistent drone pressure and artillery fire, blunted Russia's mechanized potential before it could be translated into territorial gains. Ukrainian forces say armored units that were expected to spearhead advances instead became repeated targets for first-person view drones and precision strikes, leaving damaged or destroyed equipment scattered along approach routes. Those claims are reinforced by images and battlefield videos released by Ukrainian military channels, including footage from trench zones near settlements in the south, where fighting has taken on a brutally close-range character. The material, presented by Ukrainian sources as an unfiltered record of the war, shows infantry engagements in narrow trench systems, often only meters apart, in conditions more reminiscent of attritional warfare from another century than of the high-tech operation portrayed by Russian state media. Ukrainian officials say that contrast is significant. While Moscow continues to present the war domestically as a conflict dominated by missiles, aviation, and technological superiority, the reality on many sectors, they argue, is one of grinding infantry losses, failed assaults, and mounting exhaustion. The wider significance of the southern fighting has become more apparent, according to Ukrainian and open-source assessments, in the way Russia has adjusted its force posture. Reports cited by Ukrainian commentators and battlefield analysts say the Russian command has been compelled to redeploy elite formations, including airborne and marine units, from other high-priority areas to reinforce the south. Among the formations named in these reports are elements of the 76th Air Assault Division and the 40th Marine Infantry Brigade. If confirmed in full, such redeployments would suggest that Russian commanders are balancing immediate defensive or offensive emergencies against longer-term objectives elsewhere, particularly in sectors central to Moscow's long-stated aim of consolidating control over the Donbass. That redistribution of forces is especially notable in relation to the Pokrovsk axis, a key area in Russia's efforts to deepen control in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian military observers say the need to divert capable troops from sectors linked to the drive on Donbass is itself an indicator of strategic strain. In their assessment, Russia is not only paying a price where Ukraine strikes directly, but also in the form of disrupted operational planning hundreds of kilometers away. The argument from Kyiv is that by forcing Moscow to react in the south, Ukrainian defenses have imposed second-order costs on Russian ambitions in the east. Further south, in the Velika Novosilka and related directions described in the user-provided account, Ukrainian drone and assault units say they intercepted and destroyed Russian mechanized assault groups shortly after they began moving. One of the formations highlighted in Ukrainian reporting is the so-called Hungarian Birds, an unmanned systems unit credited with detecting approaching Russian armor and directing strikes against tanks, armored personnel carriers, and light transport vehicles. Ukrainian statements say Russian infantry who attempted to disperse into buildings after their convoy was hit were subsequently targeted by assault units. Another drone formation, identified in Ukrainian reporting as the Phoenix unit, has also been cited in connection with strikes on Russian transport, shelters, and field positions, contributing to what Kyiv portrays as a systematic campaign to make routine movement behind and near the line of contact increasingly dangerous for Russian troops. The pressure, according to Ukrainian officials, is not limited to Russian assault groups and supply vehicles. Kiev has also highlighted strikes against Russian air defense systems, emphasizing the symbolic and operational importance of destroying equipment meant to shield rear areas from Ukrainian attack. Ukrainian reports from the Zaporizhzhia direction claim that systems such as the Tor M2, components of the S-300V family, and Pantsir S-1 launchers have been hit by domestically produced strike weapons and drones. In another sector, on the Kherson front, according to the account provided, a Buk M3 system was also reportedly targeted. For Ukraine, such strikes serve a dual purpose. They remove defensive layers protecting logistics and command nodes, and they reinforce the message that even some of Russia's most advanced systems are vulnerable when Ukrainian intelligence, precision, and timing align. A similar pattern is being reported far from the south. In the Lyman direction, an area that remains important to Russian designs on the Eastern Front and future pressure toward larger urban centers, Ukrainian troops say they repelled an armored attack involving tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. The 3rd Assault Brigade and supporting artillery units were credited in Ukrainian accounts with using FPV drone swarms and concentrated fire to destroy multiple vehicles and halt the advance. The significance drawn by Ukrainian commanders is broader than the loss of individual vehicles. They say Russia continues to rely on heavy mechanized formations in conditions where the battlefield has changed decisively, with cheap and widely deployed unmanned systems now capable of neutralizing much more expensive armor before it can close the distance. Near Kupiansk, the same argument is being extended to Russian infiltration tactics. Ukrainian paratroopers from the 77th Independent Air Assault Brigade said they detected a small Russian group attempting to move forward under cover and lay mines near the settlement of Zaporizhzhia. According to Ukrainian reporting, the group was quickly neutralized. Kyiv's reading of such incidents is that Russia, unable to advance openly with armor under persistent aerial surveillance, is increasingly reduced to small group tactics intended to slow or complicate possible Ukrainian counteraction. But even those smaller moves, Ukraine says, are being detected and hit by the combination of drones, surveillance, and mobile infantry. The aerial dimension of the war is another area where Ukrainian officials say Russia has suffered important setbacks. In the Pokrovsk direction, a MiG-29 of the Ukrainian Air Force was reported to have used American-supplied precision-guided munitions to strike a Russian military base near Rodinsk. Ukrainian reporting describes the strike as a demonstration that Russian rear areas remain vulnerable even when frontline assaults stall. In other words, according to Kyiv's message, a Russian formation is not protected merely because it is withdrawn from direct contact. Assembly points, logistics hubs, and temporary bases can still be reached if targeting information and precision weapons are available. One of the most significant episodes highlighted in the user-provided text concerns a strike on a facility at Donetsk International Airport, described by Ukrainian sources as a strategic Russian drone center. The reported attack, said to have taken place on the morning of March 7th, allegedly involved a coordinated use of long-range Western-supplied missiles, including ATACMS ballistic missiles and Scalp cruise missiles. Ukrainian linked accounts say the site was being used to store, prepare, and launch Shahed-type drones used by Russia in strikes against Ukrainian cities. Secondary explosions and thick smoke seen after the blast were cited as evidence that substantial quantities of drones, munitions, or fuel may have been destroyed. If the target and scale were as described, the strike would represent not only a tactical success, but also a blow to one of the main tools Russia has used in its long-range pressure campaign against Ukrainian urban centers and energy infrastructure. The attack also fits into a wider pattern that Ukraine has tried to emphasize for months, that Russia's rear area security has eroded under sustained pressure. Kiev has previously pointed to other operations against drone depots and launch facilities, arguing that destroying drones on the ground can be as strategically valuable as intercepting them in the air. For Ukraine, every warehouse, maintenance point, or launch site hit behind the front reduces the burden on air defenses protecting cities and critical infrastructure. In strategic terms, such operations are intended to shift the balance from reactive defense to proactive disruption. The broader claim now being made by Ukrainian officials is that these dispersed battlefield events form part of a single operational picture. In Kiev's telling, Russian hopes of using the winter months to gain substantial ground, break Ukrainian defenses, and create new facts on the ground have instead collided with a Ukrainian doctrine built around active defense, precision attrition, and deep disruption of supply chains. Ukrainian statements cited in the source text argue that the country has achieved a net territorial gain for the first time since the summer of 2023, with claims that hundreds of square kilometers in the south have returned to Ukrainian control through counteraction. Such battlefield claims remain difficult to verify independently in real time, but the narrative itself is central to Ukraine's strategic communication. Russia, the attacking side, is not only failing to break through in decisive areas, but in some cases, is being pushed back. The numbers used by Ukrainian officials to underscore this argument are stark. Russian monthly advances, according to the figures cited in the source material, have slowed dramatically, measured in some places at only dozens of meters per day, rather than meaningful operational breakthroughs. Kiev presents that pace not as evidence of steady attrition in Russia's favor, but as a sign of exhaustion. Ukrainian military reporting has also long highlighted very high Russian casualty figures, and in the account provided, those totals are framed as proof that Moscow's current model of warfare is unsustainable over time. The figures cited include claims of massive cumulative Russian losses, and a monthly casualty rate that, if accurate, would place extraordinary pressure on Russia's mobilization system, social fabric, and political leadership. Such estimates should be treated with caution, as wartime casualty numbers are contested and often impossible to verify immediately. But there is no dispute that losses on both sides have been severe, and that attritional warfare has defined much of the conflict. Ukrainian messaging also ties battlefield attrition to signs of strain inside the Russian military system. The user-provided text refers to reports of large numbers of Russian troops absent without leave, deserting, or otherwise disappearing from units, portraying these as symptoms of a larger collapse in morale and discipline. Combined with public criticism from Russian military bloggers of command failures and repeated complaints about logistics, those claims are being used by Kyiv to argue that the Russian war machine is under pressure, not only from Ukrainian firepower, but also from internal dysfunction. In this reading, the war is no longer simply a contest of manpower and equipment. It is also a contest of institutional resilience, adaptability, and public tolerance for prolonged sacrifice. Beyond the battlefield, Ukrainian accounts frame the costs to Russia in economic and demographic terms. The war has imposed a vast burden on state spending, labor availability, industry, and household stability. In the source text, that burden is described as visible in inflation, labor shortages, internal displacement, and weakening growth, all set against the destruction of expensive military equipment and imported drones before they can be effectively used. For Kyiv, this is an essential part of the wider story. Each tank burned on a road, each drone depot destroyed in a rear area, and each failed offensive in the mud is not only a military setback for Russia, but also an economic one, draining resources from a country already constrained by sanctions, technological isolation, and the costs of sustaining a long war. That larger political significance reaches directly to the Kremlin. Ukrainian narratives increasingly describe the military difficulties of the winter campaign as a challenge to Vladimir Putin's image of control and inevitability. The war Russia initially framed as a limited and manageable operation has become a prolonged conflict marked by funerals, repeated mobilization cycles, escalating financial demands, and strategic uncertainty. In that context, every stalled offensive and every high-profile strike behind Russian lines resonates beyond the battlefield. Ukrainian officials argue that the ghost of previous internal crises, including visible tensions within Russia's military and security establishment, still hangs over Moscow as the war drags on. The role of Western military aid and Ukraine's own domestic defense production is another recurring theme in the account provided. Precision-guided bombs carried by Soviet-era aircraft, domestically produced missiles used against air defense systems, and large numbers of locally assembled drones all feature in Kyiv's description of how it has adapted to a battlefield where mass and armor no longer guarantee success. Ukrainian officials say the combination of foreign support and domestic innovation has transformed the war, allowing them to impose asymmetric costs on a larger adversary. In practical terms, this means relatively inexpensive UAVs destroying costly armor, accurate long-range strikes hitting rear command nodes, and layered intelligence enabling faster battlefield decisions. For now, the central question is whether the pattern described by Ukrainian sources marks a temporary disruption of Russian plans or a more durable shift in the direction of the war. On one side, Russia still retains large reserves of manpower, a significant defense industrial base, and the ability to continue generating pressure on multiple fronts. On the other, Ukraine is showing increasing confidence in an approach built on attrition, intelligence, and precision rather than frontal assaults alone. The events highlighted in recent Ukrainian reporting, from the trench battles of Zaporizhzhia to the missile strike at Donetsk airport, from drone ambushes against southern convoys to interdiction operations near Kupiansk and Lyman, are now being presented as evidence that the Kremlin's winter design has fractured under the weight of Ukrainian resistance. What emerges from this battlefield picture is a war still defined by brutal uncertainty, but also by a growing struggle over operational tempo and strategic narrative. Moscow sought to impose movement, pressure, and inevitability during the winter months. Kyiv now says it has answered with disruption, selective counteraction, and deep strikes that have forced Russia to pay for every meter with men, machines, and time. Whether that momentum can be sustained in the months ahead remains to be seen. But as of now, according to the Ukrainian perspective laid out in these reports, the message from the front is clear. The winter offensive that was meant to bend Ukraine has instead exposed the limits of Russian power, the vulnerability of its logistics, and the continuing capacity of Ukrainian forces to absorb, adapt, and strike back.